Guest artists bring Broadway magic to life with signature hits from Wicked, Phantom of the Opera, Little Shop of Horrors, and more. Tickets at jacksymphony.org. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, uncovering corruption inside the sheriff's office. We ask the reporter and the former prosecutor behind the story about how the federal investigation changed Jacksonville law enforcement. Then, trying to save a 150-year-old pioneer farm on the city's north side. The owner shares his strategy for staying alive. And Steinway pianist who performed on stages around the world is making a stop in Jacksonville. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after today's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is going to Israel today to help support a U.S.-backed ceasefire for Gaza. Before he left, Rubio criticized a vote by Israel's parliament that seeks to annex the Israeli-occupied West Bank. That's home to Palestinians. Vice President Vance echoed Rubio's criticism as the vice president concluded his trip to Israel today. Both Vance and Rubio are among several Trump administration officials who visited Israel this week for meetings. That includes Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports on ethics questions surrounding Kushner's involvement in the Mideast peace process.
The president's son-in-law and former chief advisor has used relationships developed during the first administration to secure some fruitful business opportunities. Daniel Shapiro, who was the ambassador to Israel during the Obama administration, says it's fair to question whether those like Kushner should be doing diplomacy with countries they're also doing business with.
I don't think there's any question that Jared Kushner's involvement in that critical phase, given the relationships he has and given the experience he's had working with these governments previously, helped produce a result fairly quickly that brought about the good outcome.
Shapiro says there are few lines between politics and business in the region, and that helped Kushner broker an agreement. Franco Ordonez, NPR News.
The North Carolina state legislature has approved a new congressional map. The measure aims to help Republicans win an additional seat in the U.S. Congress next year. The bill passed the House yesterday.
All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it.
North Carolina is the latest state to redesign its maps to try to give Republicans a congressional advantage. California is trying to counter a move by Texas. California voters will decide whether to adopt a new map that aims to give Democrats 5 more congressional seats. The social media site Reddit is suing artificial intelligence company Perplexity over alleged data theft. As NPR's Bobby Allen reports, it's the latest legal battle over the controversial data collection practices of the AI industry.
Reddit says AI search engine Perplexity and other data scraping companies engage in a industrial-scale, unlawful collection of comments from millions of the site's users. Lawyers for Reddit compare the actions to would-be bank robbers who can't get into a vault, so they break into an armored truck instead. Perplexity denied the allegations, saying its practices remained principled and responsible. A wave of lawsuits are now playing out centered on how AI companies train chatbots to become so powerful. Vast corners of the internet have been scanned without permission, spurring copyright lawsuits from publications like the New York Times. In this case, Reddit says other AI chatbots have struck licensing deals, but Perplexity has refused. Bobby Allen, NPR News.
This is NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It is 9:04. Kids Hope Alliance CEO Sarah Lynn Grass was fired yesterday after facing criticism for her role in a private consulting company that touted its grant writing services as well as its expertise about education, schools, and child abuse. The alliance, formed by the city of Jacksonville in 2017, provides grants to nonprofits that support children. Back in May, Grass and her husband created the company Verdant Synergies, according to the Florida Division of Corporations, and Grass is listed as its current president. On its website, Verdant says it does not consult on cases involving the city of Jacksonville, and it does not apply or receive funding from the city. After the Alliance Board's votes yesterday, Grass said it was an honor to serve the city and its children, youth, and families. Grass had been CEO at the Kids Hope Alliance since 2023. Chief Administrative Officer Kenneth Darity will be the organization's interim leader. The PGA Tour is canceling its season opening event, the Century, instead of moving the tournament to a new course. The Century had been played at Kapalua on Maui since 1999, but a drought coupled with lawsuits over a water delivery system have left the course bone dry and temporarily closed. The Ponte Vedra-based Tour and Wisconsin-based Century spent the past month contemplating other courses before deciding the best option was to not play it in 2026. That means the Sony Open in Honolulu will start the new season on January 15th, the latest start since the PGA Tour started back in 1969. We'll have cool temperatures today in Northeast Florida.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Capital One, offering their premium travel card, Venture X. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com. And listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, drug dealing, murder, and rampant corruption inside Florida's largest law enforcement agency. It was a story that shocked Jacksonville and forced lasting reforms. We talked to two key players about the 1990s scandal that engulfed the sheriff's office. Later in the program, preserving a pioneer farm and the stories of the people who lived there. We talked to a modern-day descendant about opening up the remarkable history and the farm itself to the public. But first, it was arguably the worst police corruption scandal in the history of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, involving not just graft, cocaine, and threats, but home invasions, kidnappings, murder, and ultimately indictments and prison time. It's the subject of a retrospective documentary, and here to talk about it is former federal prosecutor and retired current U.S. Magistrate Judge for the Middle District of Florida, James Klindt. Good morning, Judge.
Morning.
We're also joined by News4Jack's morning show anchor and I-Team reporter, Jennifer Waugh. Jennifer, thanks for being here.
Thank you for the invite. Good morning.
So, Jen, you are the host and the reporter behind this series, Florida Justice. It's a new crime documentary series that News4Jax is doing. And the first story that you chose to focus on dates to the late 1990s. What made you want to dig back into this case in particular?
Well, as a cub reporter, as I like to say, when I had just really started working at Channel 4, I stumbled upon this because I was asked to become the police beat reporter. Joy Purdy, who works at the station now, was moving on to work in Miami. She was the police beat reporter covering, big crime stories for the city. And I was, asked to move into this position. And she had been working on a story associated with police corruption. And so she and I worked, several weeks, together. And then I kind of took this over and spent the better part of about 3 years trying to get as much information out of this man here, Jim Klindt, who would give me no information, by the way, as he was walking in and out of the courtroom, as we were hearing, within the halls of the police station, that there was corruption and it was being investigated. And so ultimately, what we learned is that this dated back really to 26 years ago. And essentially what happened is we had, there was this investigation associated with a conversation that was heard in a federal wiretap involving a very well-known notorious drug dealer who suggested then that there was some kind of leak within the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. The blue uniform was listening. And as a result of those 5 words, it launched this investigation led by Jim Klindt and involving a handful of Jacksonville Sheriff's officers and DEA, and unraveled what became really quite well known as one of the most well-known cases of police corruption within the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, leading to the arrest of 3 officers.
What Jennifer's leaving out is that her reporting at the time, along with Jim Schottler, the late Jim Schottler,
At the Florida Times Union.
Florida Times Union, their reporting was critical to the case because, and it wasn't necessarily designed that way. It was because they were doing a good job of investigative reporting, and so that led to 2 things. One, it led to certain leads for us as investigators and prosecutors, and it also, for lack of a better way of saying it, made some of the suspects nervous.
Ah.
And so they weren't as careful as maybe they would have been, and so the reporting was actually, somewhat key to the case. So Jennifer's leaving that part out.
Interesting. And so little cub reporter Jen was plaguing you, coming and going from the federal courthouse. You were the prosecutor on the case, handling this investigation. And, this is an incredibly complicated story. There are many officers involved. There's many civilians involved. There's a lot of people that were informants that are involved. And of course, this whole team of investigators, yourself involved. Can you give us sort of the thumbnail version, the nickel version of who did what and what the outcomes were?
Well, it seems complicated at first glance, but when it comes down to it, the case itself and the crimes that were committed involved a handful of officers. It was Eric Sinclair, who worked off duty at a bank doing security. He came up with an idea of robbing a convenience store owner or one of his workers as the convenience store owner or worker walked out of the bank with a lot of cash, usually around $50,000, to use to cash checks down at the dock. And so that there was that aspect of it.
The convenience store would cash checks for people who worked like near Talleyrand on the Fridays, or bringing their checks.
Right, and so he came up with this idea, and that he would have a drug dealer and his brother, Daryl Crowden, 8-Ball was the drug dealer, and Jeff Reed was his brother. That he would have those two rob the convenience store owner. So there was the robbery aspect of it that happened with Hassan Tahan, who was Sammy Safar's nephew at one point in June of 1998. Of course, we didn't know anything about anything that was going on, but that became a focal point of the investigation later on.
And so Eric Sinclair is working off duty as a police officer, and he arranges for someone to rob the bank while he's on duty.
Well, basically rob the customers when they walk out of the bank.
Okay.
And the people he used to rob them were drug dealers that he had come in contact with on the job. So sometime earlier he had arrested Daryl Crowden, and it's kind of not a funny story, but an interesting one. He caught Crowden with cocaine and marijuana, and so he told Crowden, I'm gonna give you a break here, and he basically threw the cocaine in the trash can and only charged him with a small amount of marijuana. So Crowden kind of owed him, and they developed a relationship.
And that was deliberate.
Yes. Oh yeah, it was set up, and then eventually those two committed a number of crimes together, drug crimes, and then this robbery. Now Carl Walden, another police officer who worked in the narcotics unit with Sinclair, he gets involved in this the robbery part of this, because he hears through the grapevine that Sinclair got what they called a lick, and so he approached Sinclair and said, "Hey, let's do that again."
This deal where someone comes to the bank,
Yeah.
takes out a lot of money, and Eric Sinclair, working off duty, kind of helps orchestrate this robbery.
Right.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again. And Sinclair's like, well, if we do it again, everyone's gonna be suspicious that I'm involved. So Sinclair tells him, I'm not going to do it. but yet he told Walden exactly how it worked and laid the plan out for him.
So one thing I want to stop you there because you've mentioned the two key players, Carl Walden, Eric Sinclair, these officers that were involved. And we'll get more to kind of how the case was unraveled and how you built the case. But you mentioned the fact that, right off the bat, you have an off-duty officer working at a bank where two robberies of $50,000 apiece, essentially, are committed. How is it that that fact alone doesn't prompt some extra eyes on Eric Sinclair? Why doesn't that prompt at that time JSO to say, hey, this is a little weird that our own officers overseeing two $50,000 robberies of customers at this bank who happen to be related to each other?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. I mean, in retrospect, because of course, again, our investigative unit wasn't involved in any of that at the time. We learned, we got to that and found all of this out later. But it's a puzzling question because when the robbery happened the first time, and this was in June of 1998. No, it was in May of 1998. Excuse me. Thank you, Jennifer. Maybe she should.
No, you're doing a great job.
But when it happened, there was an initial bit of a suspicion about, well, what about the officer who was on duty? And actually, the state attorney's office subpoenaed Eric Sinclair's telephone records with a thought to, maybe that would just kind of tell us if something happened, because the convenience store owner, Sammy Safar, who eventually was murdered, he and his cousin, they were a little suspicious of how this robbery could have happened, right? Because Hassan Tahan, when he walked out of the bank with the $50,000 in May of 1998, Eric Sinclair was supposed to be right there with him. That was part of Eric Sinclair's duty, was to walk customers like that right to the car. So when Hassan Tahan got to the car and Jeff Reed, one of the two robbers, pulled up and basically put a gun in his face, he looked to see where's Sinclair. And so Sinclair wasn't there. And so they were suspicious that Sinclair had something to do with it. It prompted the state attorney's office to subpoena the telephone records, but nobody ever looked at them at that time.
Jennifer, in that same vein, after Hassan Tahan was robbed, he and his cousin, Sammy Safar,
his uncle.
His uncle.
His uncle,
Yeah.
Sammy Safar, who were involved with this convenience store, basically said to each other, we're not going to let this happen again. We are going to leave the bank. We're going to lock our doors. We are not going to stop for anybody, no matter what. But Sammy Safar did stop the day that he was murdered. And his nephew knew that there was something weird about that. He suspected police involvement right from the beginning.
And really his brother as well. So you have Sammy Safar. He's one of 9 brothers, right? Comes here to our country for a better life. It works 7 days a week, nonstop, night and day, and builds this business. And he has these 3 convenience stores. And so when his nephew, who's younger, is robbed leaving this bank, he said, you know what, I'm not going to have you do the bank withdrawals anymore. I'm going to do it, worried about safety and everything else. And so Sammy takes it upon himself. This is going to be my job now. So he goes, like he always does, to Jim's point, goes on, on a Friday. It's always at the same time, which is how Eric Sinclair is able to, to share with Carl Walden, what that routine is, so that everybody knows generally when Sammy Safar is going to be there. And Sammy had told his family, including his brother, who was also here, and told his brother, he said, you know what, from now on, because it was so strange that Eric Sinclair, who always walked bank customers out to their car because they were carrying so much money. Look, this was on West 44th Street. This was not a very safe part of the city, but it was very close to where Sammy Safar's businesses were. And so, he always walked him out. I mean, that was the protocol and the procedure. And the fact that he didn't, they thought it was just very suspicious. So he said, you know what, from now on, I'm going to start making the bank withdrawals, and I am not going to stop for anyone unless it's law enforcement. And so they knew, because when Sammy Safar disappeared on July 3rd, of 1998, his brother started looking for him. When he didn't show up at the bank and didn't, when he didn't show up at his business at the convenience store after withdrawing all that money, they knew that something immediately was wrong. So his brother, Sari, immediately started looking for him and happened to find Sammy Safar's 4Runner, his truck, parked in the parking lot across the street from the bank, and it was empty. And it was unlocked, and there was cash. Some of the cash he had withdrawn was just sitting there in plain view, and his wallet was there. And in the wallet was everything except for his driver's license. Why would your driver's license, if you've told your family you're never going to stop for anyone, why would your driver's license be missing? Because when you were stopped by a police officer, you gave it to the police officer. And that's what happened. Carl Walden forgot that part. He forgot to put it back into his wallet.
And so the family from the beginning told police, we think police are involved. And yet it would be years and it would require this whole investigation, that you helped lead in this prosecution to drill down on that. What was the resistance that you met when you first began looking into whether there was corruption happening in the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office?
Well, the telephone conversation that Jennifer mentioned before, where we're on a wiretap, the task force officers, Richard True and Dave Bisplinghoff, they heard Blue say, the blue uniforms are listening.
Blue is the drug dealer, Abdul Robinson.
Yeah, blue, and the blue uniforms and blue gets a little confusing, but hearing that the blue uniforms are listening, we were immediately suspicious because the wiretap just didn't go like the wiretap should have, because on some recordings we had with confidential informants on them, they talked pretty freely. So we expected that for them to be wide open on the phone, and they weren't. Well, of course, we learned later that Eric Sinclair was on their payroll, and he was tipping them off because he was a narcotics detective when he was on duty, and he was Bisplinghoff's partner. So he was tipping Blue and Smiley, the other notorious drug dealer, as they've been labeled, to search warrants, and then evidently this wiretap. And I think Sinclair was supposed to get paid like $500 a week. It was not, it's not a regular business, so it wasn't. It didn't happen every week, but it was those words. It just didn't seem right together with what we weren't getting on the wiretap.
What was the conversation like? What was the conversation like that sounded different to you?
Well, these guys started talking in code a lot more, and really not wanting to talk on the phone at all. Mm. And it's like, this isn't how they've been operating when we've been, using other investigative techniques. So you asked about the resistance to going forward. So what happened was, of course, we, and when I say we, Sheila Smith, who she's still my wife, she was my wife at the time, she was the task force supervisor for DEA. She's a DEA agent. And Richard True and Dave Bisplinghoff worked for her. So those were the three main people kind of involved in the wiretap, and so we decided, look, we've got to take a look at this. We've got to see what the heck might be going on here in terms of the blue uniform and who leaked that. And so we convened a meeting at the U.S. Attorney's office, and Sheriff Glover was there, and then the undersheriff and the narcotics supervisors. And so we laid out what we've just talked about in terms of the blue uniform on the wiretap, and basically Sheriff Glover was hesitant. The other officers, the other supervisors, were hesitant to investigate their own officers.
Did they not believe you?
Well, I mean, it was on the tape, so they couldn't argue with what was on the tape, but that's really what we had to go on. What was on the tape, and as I've explained to you, how the wiretap seemed to be going differently than we had expected. So Sheriff Glover, and we asked Sheriff Glover to if we could have a word with him, Brian Kane, who was the supervisor in our office. So he and I and Sheriff Glover met in a separate room from everyone else, because it was a large meeting, probably too big to start with. That was probably a mistake to begin with. But we just said to Sheriff Glover, look, here's the bottom line. You don't want to do this, but we're doing it with you or without you. So your officers, True and Bisplinghoff, they can either work on the task force and you can be part of solving this problem if there is one, or at least getting to the bottom of it, or frankly, we'll use grand jury subpoenas to get the information we can. So by not participating, you're not going to stop the investigation.
And you're not going to look good if you find something.
Well, we didn't go that far, but that was what was left sitting there.
Yeah.
And if I could just add in also, I mean, if you're thinking about these officers, just for some context here, I mean, first of all, remember, we're talking about 1999, 2000. Among the many things that you did as a prosecutor, corruption was certainly high on that list, right? But this wasn't corruption within the Jacksonville Sheriff's. I mean, it happened, but to this degree, and these officers were extremely well respected. Eric Sinclair, he grew up on the east side, tough part of town for sure, but, went to Andrew Jackson, went on to college, star basketball player, came back here, worked his way up through the ranks at JSO, was in narcotics. Carl Walden aspired to be sheriff one day,
Right.
As an example here. And of course, the Eric Sinclair was kind of that first. Carl Walden kind of became, I liken this a little bit to a piñata. Every time you hit it, more comes out. And I think that that's really what happened. You start with this wiretap. It leads you to Eric Sinclair. And then that leads you to Daryl Crowden, who was working with Eric Sinclair, and then it slowly leads then to Carl Walden, and then slowly, and it's almost one of those things where it's like, wait, there's another officer who's also committing crimes, and then another officer committing crimes.
And we do know, we should say that Carl Walden killed Sammy Safar, that he was the one who wrapped a cord around his neck and choked him to death.
Well, just technically, he didn't choke him to death. The rope probably caused Sammy Safar to lose consciousness. This was in the back seat of the police car, and then Sammy Safar fell in between the cage and the seat of the police car and died of asphyxiation.
Okay.
But Carl Walden set in motion the killing of him. But at the time in September of '99, when we heard this, the blue uniforms are listening. Of course, we didn't know it was Eric Sinclair. We didn't know it was Carl Walden was involved. We didn't know who this was tied to. And so Sheriff Glover, I understood it. He didn't want to launch an investigation on his own department. But, so he was reluctant to join it. So he basically said no and left. And so we're like, okay, we're on our own. Right away, we get the DEA, Sheila in, and okay, who are we going to put on from DEA to work on this? And then later in the afternoon, the phone rang, and it was Sheriff Glover, and he said, I've decided we're in. So he changed his mind. Something changed his mind. Upon reflection, the same day that we had the meeting, he decided they were in. And then that's when we put the task force together. And then what Jennifer said about, it all started coming apart.
When you're putting together a task force, though, how do you know who to trust? Because obviously there are leaks happening. You don't know yet who the officers are that are doing the leaking.
Well, that became an issue later. We Sheriff Glover from JSO, he allowed us to handpick the officers we wanted, and then DEA, Sheila brought up on board another DEA agent. We had an IRS agent, one of probably the best ever in Jacksonville, Tim Pardue. He came on board. Tony Hargrove, a longtime FDLE agent who I worked corruption cases with in the past, he came on board. So we were looking for people that we knew. John Zipper was a robbery detective, and I had worked cases with John for years.
And he's still at the state attorney's office?
I think he retired again.
on and off, I think. Yeah. When he's needed.
I always tell him he's my hero because he's just a police officer's police officer. But that's how we did it. Now, eventually, and this could be, eventually we became concerned that certain people on the task force, none of the ones I've named, I don't want to name who they are, but that some of the people on the task force were leaking what we were doing as a task force. So, and by the way, the FBI, there were 2 FBI agents on too. I didn't want to forget the FBI on the task force. but so eventually we would have to do some of the undercover work that we did because, as Jennifer mentioned, Daryl Crowden, he was one of the ones involved in the bank robbery, in May of 1998. We eventually got to him. He cooperated, and he's the one who told us about Sinclair's drug dealing, the bank robbery, having met Carl Walden, and Sinclair later telling him that Walden got a lick, meaning Walden, referring to the Sammy Safar robbery and murder on July 3rd. So Crowden was kind of the key moving forward on that. But we did undercover work, sending Crowden in, wired up with recording devices into Sinclair at one point in the investigation, and the whole task force wasn't involved. In fact, only Sheila, John Zipper, Dave Bisplinghoff, and Richard True knew about it, and they were the only ones who went out on it because we had leaks within the task force.
And that undercover operation got really tense.
Oh, with the Crowden going in?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The officers out there thought that they were worried that Sinclair was going to kill Crowden, and part of the worry and the concern was that he was wearing a recording device, a recorder, but he also had a Kell on that was real time, like a transmitter, so the agents could listen, to the conversation. And for some reason, it went dead. It's kind of like with your cell phone. You walk into the wrong part of the room, and the transmission goes down. So they're like, "Oh my God, did Sinclair find the wire?" That was the concern, and they were about ready to knock the door down, and it came back on.
Jen, one of the things in this case, in addition to the leaks that they were dealing with, was they had, and I don't remember which witness it was, but had taken a polygraph, and the polygraph itself vanished during this investigation.
So, part of this is understanding the timeline, and you're talking about, 3 years here, right? So you're talking about Sammy Safar was murdered July 3rd, 1998. Okay. And there's some questions about the bank, right? 2 robberies. Remember, Hassan Tahan, his nephew, and Sammy Safar, that robbery, they were 6 weeks apart. And now you're fast forwarding now, and these law enforcement officers are still committing crimes, but it's gone pretty quiet. I mean, you've dated Eric Sinclair back to crimes in Jason Puda, 1996. Okay, so this had been going on for some time in terms of these officers, and then so now you fast forward, no one knows anything, right? And then you fast forward to March of 1999, where an inmate at the Duval County Jail says to a detective, it says, "Hey, I know about a robbery involving a police officer and a bank customer." And that's how so that inmate was given a polygraph and passed.
See, and that goes back to your earlier question about, like, why didn't JSO focus on Sinclair at during the time period of the robberies in 1998? And I should have mentioned that in March of 1999, as Jennifer just mentioned. Now, this is before we're involved in September of '99. But as she said, an inmate passed a polygraph that he knew, or had actually that Crowden had told him that he and Sinclair were involved in a robbery. He had walked up this informant had walked up on Crowden and Reed when they were counting the money.
Yeah.
After the robbery in May, and so 1998, but that polygraph disappeared, and eventually down the road we tried to investigate that because we were suspicious that somebody got rid of the polygraph so there wouldn't be any evidence indicating that Sinclair was involved. Somebody was protecting him, is what we thought.
Sure,
and it reappeared 3 years later, after the day after Eric Sinclair was sentenced, or did he plead?
No, well, he pled. But it was it was right after the sentencing, essentially, of in the case.
It surfaced
the day after,
and we let it be known through interviews and subpoenas that we were going to continue to try to find what the heck happened to that polygraph, and it just showed up in the polygrapher's office in the drawer of a filing cabinet.
Showed up.
That we had at least 2 people under oath telling us had been
previously
searched before, So, but we never got to the bottom of it. we never got to the bottom of who made it disappear, and so it really smelled of a cover up. But it's hard to focus on anyone in particular.
Yeah. It is a amazing story, Jen, and it's great for you to revisit it. This was something that stayed with you, obviously. What kind of feedback have you gotten so far on the series?
It's been tremendous.
Yeah.
I've been at the station for 28 years. Of all of the projects that we've really produced, it is really resonated the most, the long format projects that we've produced. So there are 6 episodes, Florida Justice Betraying the Badge, on our website, and we have had close to 750,000 views collectively of all 6 episodes, about an hour and 45 minutes worth of incredible kind of behind the scenes, those conversations. One of the things, and you know this, is when you're covering a criminal case, there are so many things that the public never hears about.
Right.
You don't know about. And it really takes, having to wait many years through the criminal justice system. In this case, I had been wanting to interview. I didn't want to do this without Jim Klindt.
Yeah.
But as a sitting federal judge, getting a sitting federal judge to try to sit down and do an interview, nearly impossible, not because he wouldn't, but because it's just
right.
Shunned upon. And so when I had heard that he sort of wasn't doing it on a daily basis, and kind of was semi-retired, I thought, you know what, I'm going to call him and see if he would do this. And the station had approached me about producing these longer format through our streaming platform, News4Jax Plus. And when he said yes, I said, this is the first one. I have been wanting to do this for 22 years.
We should say you've got another one. Just briefly, what do you queued up next?
Yep. So Florida Justice, Catching a Killer. We revisit a case that I covered 22 years ago involving a family that was murdered inside their Arlington home, working class family. All 3 of them worked at Publix. A mother, the mother's boyfriend, and her 16-year-old daughter who were killed in Arlington. I ended up chasing the suspect to Mexico. It is incredible how he was caught, and so look for that. We're in the editing stages now.
Well, I know it'll be terrific. This is a great series, Behind the Badge. Of course, you can find it on the WJXT website, and every segment is really worth watching. Judge Klindt, it's so great to have you here. Thank you for making time to talk about it.
Well, thanks for having me. Let me just say, I wanted to give Jennifer that interview a long time ago and couldn't. But one of the main reasons I agreed to it was because those police officers and agents, including my wife, Richard True,
Absolutely.
Blitz, John Zipper, they went through a lot because there was a lot of resistance and a lot of animosity because of that investigation. Because when police officers investigate police officers, nobody in the department likes it. And so those are the real, in my mind, as I called John Zipper a hero before, those are the heroes, and I wanted it to be known.
And can I add just very quickly, this was never about, for me, exposing police corruption. This was always about telling the story of Jim Klindt and the investigators and the hard work of a handful of law enforcement officers who are honest, morally strong, hardworking, dedicated, who did a tremendous job, because I do believe that these officers would still be on the beat had it not been for the work of the handful of these officers.
Yeah.
And Jim Klindt.
Well, Jennifer Waugh, Jim Klindt, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the work that you did. Thanks for the series.
Happy to be here.
All right. Up next, trying to save a 150-year-old pioneer farm on the city's north side. The owner shares his strategy for staying alive. Welcome back. Well, the oldest tree farm in Florida is opening up literally and figuratively. Here to tell us about efforts to promote and publicize its pioneer history is Danny Giger. He is the owner of Pioneer Farm on the city's north side. Danny, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we should say at the outset that we first heard about you and your farm from our colleague at the Florida Times-Union, columnist Mark Woods.
Yes.
But I believe that you kind of had a conversation with him because you're trying to get the word out. Why are you trying to get word out about the family farm?
Well, it's I think it's an historic farm, and it's a big part of Jacksonville's history. And so much of Jacksonville's history is tied up in the sort of preservation districts downtown. But it doesn't really include sort of the agrarian roots that Jacksonville really was most known for. And this farm, it's 150 years old, and my great-great-grandfather actually settled here about 200 years ago. And so and it's essentially a museum. We haven't really touched it. It hasn't been a farm since the 40s. And so everything is there, and it's sort of this picturesque slice of life and a historically accurate slice of life of what pioneer life was like here in Jacksonville. The turpentine production, the timber production, cattle production.
You grew up on the farm.
I did. I grew up there. I'm the 5th generation on the farm. And though I don't live here primarily now, I actually live in Seattle most of the time. I'm back here pretty frequently.
And so your goal is in part to provide a place for people to sort of experience what that existence was like.
Exactly. Yeah. It's to give people a snapshot of what pioneer life was like here in North Florida 150 years ago, because essentially it is set up like the farm would have been, you would have experienced it 150 years ago. And I think that's such an important piece of knowing our history, is to see that slice.
The farm history is fascinating, and I do want to get to that, but you've described it as, when it was operating, sort of an old McDonald type farm.
Yeah, it had a little bit of everything, even though it was nominally a tree. It started out as a tree farm, although they also sold chickens and eggs. But it had cattle, it had a little bit of everything, and it grew various crops. So it was like old McDonald's farm. And matter of fact, I came on a field trip there when I was young. I'm 58 now, but I went to a public elementary school, and many of the elementary school, and probably some of your older listeners will remember coming out to the farm, because we had sheep, we had chickens, we had a horse. And so the elementary schools around the area would come on field trips out to the farm.
So you went on a field trip to your own house?
I went to the field trip onto my own house, which was really fun.
So one of the ways that you're opening up the farm is, and we should say this is the last weekend of this fall festival that you're doing, but it has been ongoing, and it includes all kinds of stuff. There's a couple of crop mazes. What all is going on?
So it's a classic, and they're relatively new to this area. There are a handful of others in the area, but the Pumpkin Patch Corn Maze Fall Festival. So we have a pumpkin patch. You can get a pumpkin, but we have corn maze. We have a hayride. We have we have animal encounters. We have goats. We have chickens. And lots of corn bins your kids can play in. So lots of different activities. And we're open this weekend and next weekend. There's our last weekend. This is the second year we've been open.
Okay.
Although we will be opening, we're going to have a Santa there the 2 weekends before Christmas. I can't remember the exact dates. So we encourage people to come out. We're open from 10 to 3 this weekend.
You're going to do, so this is like a holiday event that's also coming up for kind of in December.
In December, yes.
Okay.
This will be our first year doing that.
One of the things that you're doing too is, I mean, not just letting people see, but really evoking some of the work that was done. You've got a sugarcane grinding
sugarcane
exhibit?
syrup, which is a huge part of the of Jacksonville's history that people don't know about. But most people will get their sugar from growing their own sugarcane and squeezing the juice out, boiling it down to make a syrup. And the syrup was, you could take the syrup and you could cook with it, you could trade with it, you could water it down and ferment it, which a lot of people did back in the day. And we have all the apparatus to do that. So it's a big part of Jacksonville's history, along with turpentine production, that people just don't know about. And we do a demonstration there on the farm.
Keeping the history alive there can be this sort of balancing act between, you've got this entire farm. I understand your father passed away a couple of years ago at 92.
92.
And so there was this sort of, as there sometimes is at a period like that, should we be cleaning things up? Should we be getting rid of things? And so you're going through all of this old stuff.
Yes. I threw out, I don't say I threw out, I recycled 17,000 pounds of metal out of one barn, because they don't throw anything away, right? You needed everything in a farm. So they never threw anything away.
Right.
But what's cool about it is we have my grandfather, who was born in 1879. He didn't have my father till he was 50, and he had my father when he was 40. So there should be an extra generation in there. But we have his first car. I'm using air quotes. You can't see if you're listening. But we have his first wagon. We have his wagon. He was cool. He was 17. He had wheels. Just like now, right? He had a wagon. We still have his wagon. Then we have his first car, which is a 1919 Model T bought from big Duval Ford, So this is a 106-year-old Model T. It still runs. And then we have my father's first car, which he bought for $5, which was a 1928 Model B. It was used. He bought for $5. So everything's just there.
The history that your family lived through, and as you say, it's kind of this condensed history in a way because of the way that you all were spaced out. I mean, we
Yeah.
should say that your great-great-grandfather had 23 kids, right?
Yes.
Alan Giger.
Alan Giger.
And then it was your great-grandfather who has this amazing name, Irenaeus Giger.
Irenaeus, isn't that awesome?
Oh, it should come back. Somebody needs to name their
Yeah.
kid Irenaeus.
Yeah.
But he actually homesteaded the farm in 1877.
Yes.
But during this period, I mean, there are things happening, sea changes in Jacksonville. They lived through the yellow fever epidemic. Tell us
Yes.
about that.
So, I mean, I hear all these stories. And the yellow fever epidemic, they watched, the hearses going by, and nobody left the farm for 3 months. And our farmhouse has an actual quote unquote secret passageway because when somebody would get sick, they didn't know if this was something that was pandemic level sickness. So they would isolate them upstairs in a room. But since there was no heating and cooling, essentially, no air conditioning, they created a passageway between one of the porches so somebody could sleep on the porches in the summer when it was hot, but also pass through a little passageway to get to a room that could be sort of heated in the winter.
But they would
until-
be isolated if
they
they
would be
needed
isolated
to
if they needed to be, and then they could figure out if this was something they didn't really worry about.
And when you talk about the wagons going by, so there is this epidemic that is just killing thousands of people in Jacksonville
Yes.
every single month,
Yes.
And so these caskets are going by?
Well, there was hearses going by when they would
Hearses.
take it, and there was also, the stories. I grew up with so many stories of Jacksonville. For instance, that in that epidemic, there was a field hospital apparently where Gateway Mall is now, which was sand dunes. And my grandfather remembers because they would bury the people as soon as they died in the sand dunes of the bones rolling down the sand dunes later as the winds would shift them around. And that's, that road is essentially Lem Turner. My great grandfather knew Lem Turner. He was a Civil War deserter. He
Right.
fought one battle and took off.
And your great grandfather actually kind of helped him
He fed
survive.
him. He's hid out in the marshes.
He
because would've been
left the
shot.
Confederate Army because he decided it was kind of a bogus war.
Yeah, the story, he went and saw one battle and said, "This is stupid," and came back and hid out in the salt marsh.
And your great grandfather kind of
My
helped
grandfather
him.
was a friend of his, so he fed him and kept him alive.
Your great grandfather also, I mean, just in terms of like the, enormous racial history of the period,
Yeah.
also witnessed a rather extraordinary thing with a man who was essentially living an enslaved life on a turpentine farm, not far
Yes.
from the family farm.
You could do an entire episode about turpentining and what a horrible industry it was. And essentially, this was a time in the 20s when you were kept, it was bondage. It was actual slavery. You were not allowed to leave. You would be paid in chit. You'd be paid in script, and you could only shop at the company store. You lived in company housing. You were kept perpetually in debt. And if you left, the police would drag you back. You were not allowed to leave. And this has been documented. A lot of people have documented the turpentine industry. And there was a turpentine mill on Lem Turner about where Home Depot is now. And my grandfather and great-grandfather wouldn't do business with them because they treated their employees very poorly. My grandfather befriended one of the employees who worked there. It was a black man, and he could never leave. He was in perpetual bondage. And my father, who was born in 1930, he was 5 years old in 1935, remembers his father. He saw him go by that person. He paid off his debt so that him and his family could leave. They built a log cabin so they could live on the farm and work, and he paid him an actual salary. So he had his independence. But my dad always said to me, he's like, no, slavery wasn't done. Slavery was not finished.
It's unbelievable. And that turpentine history, I mean, touches on the fact, there was also at this period Zora Neale Hurston going around collecting
Yes.
folk tales as part of the Federal Works Project. She was a family friend.
She was a family friend. I have a great aunt who was an artist. She was actually a pretty well-known artist. And she befriended Zora when they were both living in New York. It was sort of the Harlem Renaissance. And Zora would come visit the farm, and she was sort of, I didn't know her. Obviously, she died before I was born, but she was somebody who had passed through and was familiar with the family.
And also Eartha White, who's well known in this area.
Yes.
An incredible philanthropist.
A good friend of my grandmother's.
So a huge history on that farm. It is on Dunn Avenue and basically is open this coming Friday and Saturday.
Or Saturday and Sunday
Saturday
from
and
10 to 3. This is our last weekend. Come out and visit. It's an awesome place. And you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. Also at GigerPioneerFarm.com.
And we've got a link on our website with this story, but as you say, and there's also private rentals available, which is, I guess, an opportunity for people
birthday
to
parties, events. We're trying to figure out a way to support this and keep it from becoming a strip mall. We want to keep and retain this history, and a lot of development pressure around us, but our goal is to maintain this so people can come experience what life was like on a pioneer farm.
Well, here is definitely hoping it doesn't become a strip mall. Appreciate the work that you're doing. Danny Giger, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, and have a great day.
All right. Up next, a Steinway pianist who's performed on stages around the world makes a stop in Jacksonville.
The White House asked Congress to pull back federal funding for public media that had already been approved, and Congress has gone along. We want you to know that NPR and this station remain committed to informing the public, increasing your understanding of the world, and hopefully enriching your life in other ways. But without federal funding, we're relying on your support now more than ever. Please make your gift to this station today. Here's how, and thank you.
Visit WJCT.org/sustain and thank you.
This week on No Small Endeavor, 3-term U.S. Poet Laureate Joy Harjo.
Poetry, it's ceremonial language, language of ritual, language that taps on your heart and says, okay, let's pay attention here.
Tonight at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Albania has a new artificial intelligence minister. Not a minister for AI. It's a minister who is actually an AI. She says she's here to help humans, not replace them. But this AI minister is making big decisions for the government. It may be the first, but it won't be the last.
I think, quite frankly, the public will probably, if not demand it, they're certainly going to expect it.
That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. once said he took so many vitamins he couldn't remember them all. Around 75% of Americans take a dietary supplement. Now the secretary who champions health alternatives is pushing to rein in a largely unregulated market. What you need to know next time you browse the supplement section. Taking our vitamins next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, a world-touring classical pianist who played her first recital at the age of 6 is bringing her extensive discography, including a repertoire from Mozart to Beethoven, to the First Coast. Here to tell us about her performance tonight at Friday Musicale is Katie Mahan. Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So you were in town for a lecture last night ahead of tonight's performance. Will you tell us a little bit about what your subject was?
So my subject was Mozart, because I actually live in Salzburg, and Mozart is one of the great passions of my life. And I had the wonderful opportunity during COVID and shortly after to do a project with Colorado Public Radio in which I basically took my viewers on all of the places in Salzburg where Mozart was associated with. So the places where he lived, where he had friends, where works were premiered, and it was an absolutely fascinating project. And so from that, I have now a regular lecture, which I've been invited to give at many places in Europe and the U.S., and it's a lot of fun to talk about Mozart the man.
Yeah. And so you're able to kind of bring people on that journey, show them sort of through the places that he lived and worked and stayed, a little bit about who he was as a person. He's a a fascinating subject.
Exactly, and I think in a lot of the biographies, there's a focus on Mozart in Vienna, but Mozart didn't come from Vienna. He came from Salzburg, and I think it's important for every one of us to realize that the place where we are born certainly shapes us, and it Salzburg shaped Mozart, his personality, his desires, and his whole, as a person. And so that's what I wanted to focus on in this series.
Tell us a little bit about Salzburg. I mean, how is it that that town, what is the town, um, in what ways does it influence him? In what ways does it influence people like you who live there?
Well, I think in Mozart's day, it was a very extremely religious, very wealthy place. And, Mozart's family was very devout. And Mozart grew up with a very strong sense that his talent was God given. And in a way, he believed, his father believed, his mother also believed, that his goal in life, his whole purpose in life would be to realize those God given talents, And also another thing that's very interesting about Salzburg is they've had always a very special sense of humor,
Mhm.
And this kind of earthy sense of humor is something that we read in Mozart's letters, this toilet humor and
Earthy,
this
I like
whole
that.
ideas of jokes and games. He was a product of the Salzburg mentality.
That's fun.
Mhm.
So you also were a very young performer. Do you learn anything in studying about his life and his childhood, his emergence into the musical scene, just in your own upbringing and in your own career?
Well, I mean, I can't compare myself to Mozart. He was one of the greatest geniuses
I
to ever live.
I'm not
But
asking you to make that
yeah.
jump necessarily, but just in terms of being a child prodigy, which you
Yeah, I
were.
mean, of course, you have to, if you have a talent as a child that you want to build for a career, then your childhood is different than other people because you are focused on your art. I mean, when I was in kindergarten, I went to morning kindergarten. My mom picked me up. We had lunch, and I practiced literally the rest of the day. So already at the age of 5 and 6, I was practicing 5 to 6 hours a day. And so that was my life. It was school and piano.
Yeah. Well, we do have a clip, a video and audio clip. It is your interpretation of Piano Sonata 14 by Beethoven,
Mhm.
later named Moonlight Sonata, and it is on your new record, Heaven and Hell.
Mhm.
Let's take a listen. It's just lovely. I mean, it's such a familiar tune, but you play with such emotion and, such kind of depth of feeling. How do you learn a piece like that? And how do you learn to play it in a way that it is personally expressive, in addition to being sort of a song, a melody that we're all familiar with?
Well, in the case of that particular piece, I've also taught piano since I was 13, and I've taught it to so many students. And it was actually a piece I didn't really have any desire to learn until
Because you'd heard it so much?
yeah, and because so many young people play it, and but then I learned the story that this piece is actually related to Mozart, and there's a very interesting story behind it. It has absolutely no relation to Moonlight, but rather it is related to Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. And Beethoven was very influenced by Mozart. And when he wrote this movement, Beethoven makes a very unusual remark at the beginning that the entire first movement, this famous piece, should be played with the pedal down from beginning to end. And, this is not typical for the classical period, but Beethoven writes very clearly senza sordino. And so that means that from beginning till end, there should be a complete blur of harmonies. And when I discovered the story with the connection to Mozart's dramatic opera Don Giovanni, I thought, okay, maybe this is the connection, because in this first movement, Beethoven is looking back on to Mozart and back to the whole story of Don Giovanni as if in a dream. And dreams are blurred, harmonies are blurred, and so it makes sense. And so the piece really came alive for me.
Oh, it's fascinating. I'm sorry to have not heard your lecture last night because I know there's such a rich history to share. But for people who want to hear your music, it is being performed tonight. The performance is from Vienna to New York, and we should say it includes all the way up to George Gershwin. So a really broad range of music. And we've got a link on our website. Katie Mahan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
having me.
All right, join us tomorrow when we talk to our panel of journalists about the week's big headlines. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. The Florida Forum Speaker Series, benefiting Wolfson Children's Hospital, welcomes professional basketball player Caitlin Clark, October 29th at the Jacksonville Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets and information at thefloridaforum.com.